Hi, everyone. Welcome to Type Talks. Today, we're here with two very lovely ENFPs. And so, we're actually with a Latin teacher today, and her name is Dawn. She has a gift for bridging Latin with very heart moving explanations. And so, I feel like she brings the NF to Latin in very beautiful ways.
Aw.
And so, we're here to explore that today. And Carol has dabbled in Latin too, and she is going to share her little
Excuse
story.
me? I translated Cicero, Joyce. That is not freaking dabbling, okay?
Yeah, so
I'm just teasing you, but that
she
was
It's not.
swam.
No, I can confirm as a
I'm
Latin
sorry.
teacher, that is not dabbling. That's okay. I just want to validate Carol's pain.
Yeah,
That's right.
she was in the Pacific Ocean of Latin too, so very deep knowledge. Today we're here to learn some words that I think a lot of ENFPs will appreciate, and it might give you a love of the language. And so, put down your Duolingo. We're going to learn from the pros today. Dawn has this beautiful way of using Latin to look at the gifts of people. She uses Latin to get to the root of root words and to the root of others and themselves. And I'll let you both give an introduction of yourself to give the audience members an idea of who you are.
Yeah, so I'm a Latin teacher. I've been teaching Latin in the Chicago public schools for the last 20 years at a wonderful neighborhood high school on the south side of Chicago called Kenwood Academy. And we are the only neighborhood high school in CPS that still offers Latin. The rest of the schools are either charter or magnet. So in magnet, you test in. I originally started studying Latin because I thought I would become a lawyer. And I met my mentor in undergrad, and he asked me why I wanted to be a lawyer. And I told him, and he said, well, have you thought about being a teacher? Because he knew I wanted to be a lawyer for very altruistic reasons. And the rest is history. So I got a scholarship to go to Monmouth College for Latin, and that also put me on that path. And Latin just helps me make sense of things that never made sense for me before. I am a double first graduate in my family, and so it helped just put things together for me.
Yeah, well, I'm glad, and we're going to learn a lot from your wisdom. And so when you talk about you originally wanted to be a lawyer and you wanted to do it for altruistic reasons, and then someone told you, I actually think you fit being a teacher more. I think it's the story that a lot of Catalyst, and so that stands for the NF letters in the Myers-Briggs code, they tend to really value doing things to help people reach their human potential. And so an NF can take a field that's traditionally not that NF and turn it into a very catalyst field. So there's someone called Raina from my panels, and she's an ENFJ. She went to go into the military, but she actually went to do it to do peacekeeping missions. So she did it to create world peace. And then people are like, that's not really what we do on a daily basis, right? And then the NF's like, oh, then I guess I'm doing this all wrong. You'll find people in fields you didn't expect them to be in because their overall overarching motive was very different than the usual person who tends to go into that field. And so I didn't let Carol introduce herself. So before we move on to today's content, I'm wondering if you can let us know a few words about yourself.
Sure. I'm Carol Linden. Joyce and I met through Alinda Barron's class because we love psychological type. I am on the board of APTI, which I have been for a number of years. I am absolutely determined to bring the rich depth of knowledge and information and the ethics of using type in a way that helps people instead of hurts people. When it's used unethically, it hurts people. So that's my personal mission right now. And Joyce got on the bandwagon with me to bring the world of the Association of Psychological Type to the internet world of type, because we should be married or joined at the hip or something. And that's what Joyce and I are working on. I started out, I knew I was going to be a teacher. In high school, I knew I was going to be a teacher. I was going to be an English teacher. Then I got to college and I took a course called Religion 111. It was required. And we read, I'm not going to remember the books now, but we didn't read religious texts. We read novels and philosophical stuff. And it was about how religion is mankind's search for knowing itself and knowing its connection to something that mankind senses bigger than itself, but has a hard time defining. So that took me away from being an English major. And then I went to graduate school in religion and literature. I studied religion and modern culture. So that was a very NF thing to do, I think, to start out as an English teacher and become a religion and modern culture comparative religion major. And then I had to make a living, and I got a job as a tech writer. And I thought, there was no teaching jobs in. You know how, Dawn, some years there are teaching jobs and some years there aren't. So I got a job as a technical writer, and my NF self said, oh my God, they're going to pay me money and let me write all day. This doesn't get better than this. So I visualized myself as a closet teacher secretly standing over the shoulder of the end user. I worked for a software company, and I was writing the books. And my vision was their day was going to go better if I did my job right, if made the book accurate and usable. So go ahead, ask me how many ENFPs there were in the publications division. There were Carol. There were Carol in ENFPs. In fact, there weren't very many extroverts at all. Almost everybody in the department was introverted. So I stuck out like a sore thumb. But I started leading cross-functional teams, because what does an ENFP do but want to reach out to people? So I was the person leading cross-functional teams. And then I realized these people didn't understand each other, and I started learning type and interaction styles and temperament and EQI, and I ended up in learning and development, and that's what I've done since 2002. So I think I have a pretty NF kind of going to things that were meaningful. I got bored with the content of the writing, but I really got fascinated by how it's going to help these different people understand each other on the cross-functional teams. And that I just was trying to be a team leader and a manager that made communication work. And I ended up in a new career that was my dream career. So I was an NF following passions and ended up in the career of a lifetime. But that was not the original goal. I didn't even know about organizational development or psychological type when I was in college. So I think, and Joyce, I think you're absolutely right. NFs end up in odd careers like tech writing. I loved writing. We end up in odd careers where there aren't many of us, but we're there for a different reason. I was probably one of the very few people in the department imagining myself as a teacher standing over the shoulder of the person using the book.
Exactly. And I find ENFPs tend to have the emergent path appear in their career. So they chase what tends, like, they don't chase it, but they let the pathway emerge in front of them as it comes.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. So very cool. Very cool. And so, hi everyone, I'm Joyce, and I'm a certified master MBTI practitioner. And I also facilitate the instrument in organizations. And so I also help coach people. Today we'll be going over some really cool root words that Dawn taught me, and I think that you audience members would get a lot out of learning. And so some of those words are curiosity, inspiration, and the word fabulous. I'm wondering if you can let me know what these mean down to their root and what they mean to you, Dawn.
Yeah, so I'll start with fabulous because that's one of my favorite ones. So whenever you have the OUS suffix, it means like full of. And the fab comes from the Latin word fabula, which means story. And I love in the class to do Fabulous Friday things. And so I'll do different questions. But what I love is that just by looking at that root word, it proves that we're all fabulous because we all have a story, and it's a really good one.
Yeah, and I really enjoy that about you, Dawn, because you use that to help people learn about how great they are and that everyone is meaningful, important. And it's very important to you as a teacher to make people feel seen and heard, even if they're not your student, too. And so, yeah, I think fabulous is a way of reaffirming to people that they have a worth, like they have something to give. And so everyone does. Yeah.
To me, it also makes me think of the word intelligent because it comes from the Latin word interlego, which means to understand. And everybody on this earth has a profound understanding of something. So everybody is intelligent.
Yeah. And that brings us to the root word of curiosity. So I was wondering if you could go over that.
Sure. So curiosity comes from the Latin word cura, which means care. And when I look at it, I see cur, which also in Latin means why. And I think when we are authentically curious, we have the care to ask why about a situation or person. And I'm trying to always lean and change my mindset so I'm being more curious, because I think we've been conditioned to be critical. Critical thinkers. We're just and we're not. It's so interesting to me that we're not supposed to use the word why in a question, because people will naturally get more defensive because they feel like you're accusing them of something. But that's how we're authentically curious, is when we ask, well, what's the why here? Hmm.
Yeah, exactly. So curiosity almost stands for full of why or full of care, which really
I,
makes you think about it, because it's like, to be curious, it is a way of being full of care for another person. And
hmm
it is a way of caring for someone to be
hmm
curious, because people rarely feel seen or heard. And so sometimes they just need someone to be inquisitive about them. And
hmm
so, yeah. There's also the root word of compassion too,
hmm
which really shed a light onto what that process really is, and different emotions that we went through together too, that really help you understand that emotion in more nuance after learning about the Latin root word. So I was wondering, what does compassion mean or frustration mean in Latin?
So compassion comes from whenever you have com or co as a prefix. So sometimes letters assimilate, so it'll take on the double letter of like the next syllable. So you could see col, com, etc. It means with. And it comes as no surprise that as an ENFP and as a social six, I love how we do things with. So, but the passion part comes from the Latin verb patior pati passa sum, which means to suffer or endure. So when I'm giving people compassion, I think about maybe how have I suffered in that with, and how can I suffer with, not suffer with, but I think suffering, I think we just understand pain and suffering. I think we're still trying to figure out millennia later, what does love mean? And love is another interesting one, because in Latin it means amor, but when you flip it, it's Roma, and Roma in Greek means struggle. And I think so much of how so many of us are in dynamics where love is a struggle and it's not supposed to be. And then what was the other word? So you asked about compassion. Oh, frustration. Yeah. So I was with my son one day, and I'm trying to stay regulated. I'm getting frustrated over a situation. And I stopped myself because I'm also neurodivergent. I have ADHD. So my brain is constantly moving. And so I'm like, okay, these root words, since I've learned them when I was a kid, I'm always thinking of root words, and they help slow my brain down. And we can get in later about why Latin is really great for ENFPs and for neurodivergent individuals. But so I'm frustrated, and I remind myself that frustrated comes from the Latin word frustrum, which means in vain or no purpose. And I'm like, okay, Dawn, you are a lover of learner. You love to learn. So where is the learning here? Where's the purpose in the situation? And I tell you what, when I stop and when I do that, when I'm getting frustrated, it helps recenter me.
Yeah, and I think that's beautiful. It's like you use the language itself to almost help you calibrate. So if I'm feeling frustrated, then I can just do something and find a way to make this purposeful. Like it teaches you a way to reframe it. Reframing can change the situation. Or
Hmm.
it gives a new context to frustration, because it is a feeling you feel when you feel like you can't impact the situation, but you want to. And
Hmm.
so,
Yeah,
yeah.
and you feel like there's no purpose. Oh, I'm sorry, Carol, go ahead.
Now, can we go back to compassion for a minute? Because you turned on a light bulb for me, Dawn. It's not like we get down in their suffering with them. That would be
Hmm.
boundary problems. But to be willing to be with their suffering. Like
Hmm.
people can feel supported. You don't have to particularly do or say something, but just being willing to sit there and to
Hmm.
sit with someone who doesn't have to pretend that they feel okay and that nothing's wrong, who can be in their suffering, and you can just be present with it.
Hmm.
So I hear be with their suffering.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm. Yeah,
because
thank
so
you for
many,
that.
yeah, because well, you turned on the light bulb. Thank you. So many
Hmm.
people feel like it's not okay to not
Hmm.
be upbeat and everything be okay. And that when they feel bad to begin with, then they have to use all that energy to pretend. So if you can be with their suffering and just be present, So thank you for that light bulb.
Well, you just gave me a light bulb, Carol. Thank you. I keep on wanting to call you Linda Behrens, which I think is a tremendous compliment. But it must be the Linden in your last name that I'm associating. But have you seen that little cartoon that Brene Brown made explaining empathy?
No, I may have, but tell me about it. I love Brene Brown.
Oh, it's wonderful. It's like 2 minutes. I show it to students. It's explaining the difference between sympathy and empathy.
Empathy, right.
So, and it's little cartoon animals. And the empathy one is the animal goes into the hole and is just sitting with the person.
Right.
Where sympathy is like, I don't know what kind of animal it is up there. I think it's a fox and a bear in the hole together. But don't quote me on that. I know the bear is one, but it's like an antelope or something. And the antelope is looking down and there's a ladder and the antelope is giving sympathy. So it's saying, oh yeah, you want a sandwich? Trying to fix things. And
Right.
that makes me think of the Latin word super sum, which literally means I am above, but super sum in Latin means to survive. And I always think of that cartoon because that's what sympathy is. It's like, maybe you can't handle, maybe you don't have the capacity, maybe you don't have the bandwidth to go sit with that person, but you still want to show up in some way. So like the antelope is literally above the bear, like, offering, fixing and whatnot. It also reminded me of, because I wear this t-shirt, remember Frog and Toad? This scene is really popular. I see it a lot on social media. It's where like Frog comes and sits next to Toad and does nothing. And I just love it because it could mean so many things, but it reminded me when you said just sitting next, like the compassion.
That makes me think of Beatrix Potter. Is that where Frog and Toad are from?
I think Frog and Toad are American.
Okay.
I looked them up. Yeah. But I think they're around the same time period of being popular.
Right.
Yeah. When two ENFPs meet each other, there's like light bulb after light bulb and then banter. That's rapid back and forth. Yeah. I think it's really beautiful. I think there is an element of when you care about someone, you do help with bearing their burden. Not that it's in a codependent way, but in a way where they're not alone. So you're there for them.
Excuse me. I think Dawn made a good point. It's people aren't always, I'm not always, we're not always in a place where we're capable of that. Because sitting with somebody who's crying or going through grief is a lot harder than bringing them a cup of tea. Not that it's not wonderful to bring them a blanket and a cup of tea, but it's much harder to sit with someone in pain and not try to fix it and not try to do anything. So I think we have to cut people some slack because I think we shouldn't judge people. People get so judgy, and it's not okay to judge somebody for something they're not capable of, even if it's just right then. They're spent. They're, feeling like a rag doll at that point in time. You have to have good sleep and have eaten the right things and had water and vitamin C. You have to really feel strong enough to be able to do something like sit there in empathy. So thank you for that picture.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that visual. And so you mentioned the word neurodivergent earlier, Dawn, and there's actually a Latin root word to that makes things make sense. To turn a nerve, it almost means. And so it makes sense how a lot of neurodivergence can actually feel kind of raw. Neurodivergents are more almost like affected by comments or being different because it literally means to turn a nerve in a way. So anyways, and I think it's a wonderful imagery because typology, learning about your type, if you're the minority in your situation, you are neurodivergent in that context because there's so few, or maybe you're the only one of you there. So it can really feel like it's turning a nerve. Maybe perhaps it's the vagus nerve. So that's something cool that I learned from you, but I would let you explain it in your own words. So
I think you did a beautiful job. I don't think I could explain that any better. So thank you, Joyce. Yeah, neuro meaning nerve, and then the divergent part meaning like turning from. Yeah, I mean, as a neurodivergent individual, I feel like my nervous system can be outside of my body sometimes. So yeah, it's a way of seeing that.
beautiful. And there was even an interview that you saw of Carol where you translated what she said into Latin too. And it was around her rare
Rara
bird.
avis, rare bird. Yeah, because you like to
Oh,
use rare bird a lot. And I'm like,
yeah,
Rara avis. Yeah, no, that's
I
great.
love it.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Mm-hmm.
that was in contrast to feeling like an odd duck. When I read
Mm-hmm.
Kiersey, I felt like, oh my God, ENFP, there's a thing. And I'm part of that. And there are other people like me. And this man, David Kiersey, he knows about them. And
Mm-hmm.
so that now I wasn't odd anymore. I was just rare. So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
I'm gonna love that. I'm gonna use that, Dawn.
Oh, good. Yeah, another one that Joyce, I mean, this isn't Latin, this is just a metaphor because, we love metaphors.
That's right.
Um, is that I feel like the ENFP is the bay leaf. Like we bring all the spices together. And I've been called that before. And that made me think of like, yo, that's my ENFP-ness doing that. I teach some ENFPs. And in fact, we just did like this name cloud thing where twice a year we put our name in the middle and then we all go around and write really beautiful compliments.
Oh,
And because I'm a teacher, I laminate it. And it's beautiful of how many students will say, I still have that on my wall. And but I was going somewhere with this with
now you see this happens to us all the time
oh
too. This is a
gosh.
learning moment, Dawn. You were saying that the group of ENFPs and they go around and they write
Oh,
things.
and I wrote that on an ENFP student that she's the bay leaf in the classroom who brings all the personalities together. And because I always have students at the end share out like what was something you really liked that you read. And that she shared that comment because I think it really meant a lot to her. And I said, you do. You bring all the personalities, you help find all the good. And it was something that I love about ENFPs is that we see gifts in people that they don't always see in themselves. And I try to use Latin curriculum to do that for every student. Like I did with intelligent and I wanted to throw in genius. Genius means innate gift. hmm And we all have innate gifts.
That's beautiful.
hmm
And I feel like ENFPs are good at believing in people who aren't always believed in too. So
hmm
it's like, especially fending for the underdog, finding the genius in everyone, especially
hmm
those who are commonly misunderstood by other people.
hmm Well,
Yeah.
it's like egregious, we've talked about that I would love to write a book called The Egregious because egregious means out of the flock. Like if you parse it out, and that's exactly, with it meaning very bad. And it's like, whoa, let's talk about this. Do we treat people like they're very bad if they're outside of the flock? And do we feel very bad when we feel like we're outside of the flock? I sure do. So yeah, that's another one you could think about.
Yeah, Brene Brown would be all on that. She's like, "Oh, that really gets to the crux of shame." It's like
Mhm,
when you feel out of the flock, that's when shame kicks
mhm.
in. And so,
Oh,
And even
yeah.
it touches even a deeper, older place for thousands of years, if not a few million. Getting ousted from the tribe meant certain death. I mean, it was a
Mhm,
life or death
mhm,
matter. And I remember
mhm,
reading that when somebody says something in a meeting room that is shaming to someone else in the room, that it touches the part of you that feels physical danger.
mm,
And it can activate your amygdala the same way a physical threat would, because the oldest part of us knows that being shamed in front of the tribe and being at risk at getting to stay in the tribe
mhm,
could mean death, literally. So an
mhm,
old part of us knows that, and the brain gets really reactive.
mhm, mhm. Well, speaking of throwing someone out, the Romans and Greeks used to exile people. The Greeks created ostracism, the Romans exile, and a lot of those people would have preferred death.
Yeah.
I remember reading Ovid, his Tristia during the pandemic, just for my own personal pleasure, excuse me, because he was ousted, and his poetry during that time is just so painful and relatable. Of yeah, we don't want to feel like we're outside of the flock. Um, mhm,
yeah, because it's a human urge to want to belong too, because we're social
yeah,
creatures. And
mhm.
so you can try to ignore that part of you, but it'll always be there.
It's so interesting to me that the word in Latin for shame, pudor, is the same word for sense of honor. And how often we shame, I've done it myself, we shame in this sense of honor. Like we're protecting someone, we're I just think there's something there. Hmm.
Yeah, it's to keep the sense of honor of being in the flock. I'm kidding. I'm just trying to roll
But it may.
everything together.
Yeah, this is how the flock is. How dare you, sort of thing. I
How
feel like
dare
a
you?
light bulb went off for you, Carol, when I said that.
Yeah, like how dare you endanger the flock? I mean, it
Hmm.
can go both ways. It can go
Hmm.
being fearful of being ousted and therefore being vulnerable and
Hmm.
possibly at risk of not surviving. And the other side of it is defending the group so the group doesn't fall apart. So we all get a chance to live and continue because we're safeguarding the group. So I'm seeing both ends
Hmm.
of that. Thanks, you.
Yes, and that's amazing, and also very ENFP. Seeing all the multiple things. But yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and that brings us back to neurodivergent. If you're different than the flock, you are
Hmm.
inherently endangering the flock. And so a lot of ENFPs actually deal with this period of life where they get shamed by people or
Hmm.
even bullied for being different and they didn't do anything. And
Hmm.
so oftentimes ENFPs wonder what's wrong with me? I'm either too much or not enough.
Or not enough. Hmm.
And also, ENFPs are advocates for other people who are being bullied,
Right.
and that can actually
Hmm.
get an ENFP ousted from somewhere. So they're
Hmm.
trying to defend someone, and then that ends up with them looking like the bad guy, and then they get seen as egregious when
Hmm.
they're the kindest person actually in that scenario. So
Hmm.
Look at
Hmm.
you using egregious.
we're gonna make the teacher happy.
Well, it's like once you know the root, it's hard. It's hard to not think about it. I feel like once I, parsed that out with another Latin teacher many years ago. But when you said vulnerable, it reminded me of vulnerable comes from the Latin word vulnus, which means wound. And the able means able to wound. And that's exactly what being vulnerable is. Like
Wow.
someone can wound you.
Mhm.
And that's what it feels like. You feel so raw, like you've got your hands up and someone can just do anything.
I picked up Brene when I was uh, exited corporate America and was in the world and building a business and starting a speaking career. I picked up Brene Brown's book, uh, Dare to Courage. Something could that be the
Hmm.
name of it? And
Hmm.
it started with the quote, Teddy Roosevelt's quote about the man in the arena. And I picked up that book so that I would know how to feel strong and brave in this new, arena of my life and on this new path. And what do I find out? But I've got to go get freaking vulnerable. That was not Brene Brown. Thank you very much. What I was looking for. She's right, of course. All right.
Hmm. She is
But
right.
but to
Hmm.
establish trust and to be authentic, you have to be vulnerable. So here we've got this thing. You have to be vulnerable, which means you can be wounded, and you have to be that because you can't have trust without that. And so you're between a rock and a hard place. It's a real balancing. You really do have to be brave enough to be vulnerable. And thank you, Brene Brown, but that was not what I was looking for. I was looking for armor. I was looking for wonderful magic armor Brene Brown was going to give me that was going to make me so courageous. Instead, she told me the truth.
Hmm.
Yeah, and Dawn and I were actually talking about vulnerability earlier today, and she was telling me about how ENFPs are naturally vulnerable or
Oh,
more
God, we
vulnerable than the average
We
person.
so are. That's
Hmm.
funny.
And so
She's doing her head up and down, and I'm doing this because, oh my God, that's so true. Yes, my poor heart.
yeah,
We're
ENF
agreeing.
definitely.
Hmm.
Yeah, and ENFPs usually have a higher capacity for vulnerability than most people, so they're not actually at their full capacity. So people are like, I'm being so vulnerable with the ENFP and the ENFP is so vulnerable with me. And the ENFP is like, oh, if you were inner circle, you would actually get like the full vulnerability.
That's
What
right.
you're getting right now
Hmm.
is not the full me.
That's right.
Hmm.
Mm.
I think we're the ones. I've been in so many situations where people are just like, oh, I can't believe you just admitted that about yourself. But I so identify with being the coal mine canary Sometimes I won't hit it, but most times I will. And what I find is if you're the first person who's willing to admit something,
Right.
like most people, like I just did, I admitted that I've shamed people in my life. A lot of people don't want to admit that, but we do it, and until you're aware that you do it, you can't fix it.
Right.
And yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I find that ENFPs do reserve a part of their heart for the people that they let in. So
Well, we start out foolishly showing it to everybody.
Yeah.
Is what starts from. And then we get banged up enough, we go, oh, wow, this is a really painful way to go through life. So appropriate. I feel like if you, Don, tell me what you feel about this. I feel like if you're an ENFP in this lifetime, boundaries are your learning because we just merge. We just we're out here instead of in the body. We're, out here and got sensors and we're touching everyone and with sensors and we're feeling into things. And that has to be, we're naturally that way. And I think, Joyce, life gets too hard to stay vulnerable all the time. So we learn, Brene Brown says, tell your story to someone who's earned the right to hear it. That was very meaningful to me because you don't tell your heartfelt, painful story to someone who does not have enough sensitivity or sense of respect for somebody to honor that. And instead, they'll belittle you or make fun of it. And God knows, as a young ENFP, I experienced that. So we have to learn. There are these like gateways. Joyce gives me this image of, are you out here in my life? Are you here? Or are you in here in my life? And it's not about, and the sad thing is we want nothing more than to be authentic all the time, frankly. It's just not really, it's too painful. It's not doable. And I'm not sure it's even appropriate. The appropriate thing to do is to judge wisely, which arena am I in? And to what degree does it serve the people here? That to what level I get vulnerable. But that was, God, that was a long journey learning that. Thank you, George. You gave me that series of prompts for that series of thoughts right there.
And so to prompt another thought or to inspire another thought, I was wondering if, Dawn, you could go into the root word of inspire.
Yeah. Oh, thank you, Joyce. Inspire. So whenever in starts a word, it can mean a couple things. It can be in or on. So like what we see it as in English, or it can be not. Here it just means in, but I have to give, because I'm a teacher, I have to give you all the options. So it means to breathe in. And I think about that as an educator. And I think about how we are in class, we kind of just breathe life into each other. And it makes me think of the phrase, and I would love to tell this to President Obama because hope was his campaign slogan in 2008. And he lives close to our school, his Chicago house is. So the phrase dum spiro spero, while I breathe, I hope. And the only difference between those two verbs is a vowel change. So to breathe is an I, spiro, and to hope is spero, an E. And it's all like, I looked up what vowels are, and I guess vowels, all they are an exhale. So it's like all in the exhale, because Joyce and I talk a lot about breathing exercises and mindfulness. And so I asked students, so why do you think is it a coincidence that those words look so similar? And I don't know the answer to that, and they're like, no. And then they'll explain why they think they're related. And that's inspiring. It's just beautiful, the things I hear.
I very much enjoyed the root Latin words of the word inspire because I see my friendships or relationships as giving me breath. And so I'm like, inspire is a very good way of summing that up. And so
that probably gives you hope. When
it probably gives me hope too.
Not to cut you off, I'm sorry.
I think it's wonderful. And since I asked you about a lot of Latin words, I'm curious, Dawn, what are some of your favorites? I know that we've mentioned some of them, but are there any that maybe we skimmed over?
Oh gosh, some of my favorite Latin words. Well, let me say a few of my favorite Latin phrases. So one of my favorite Latin phrases is facta non verba, which means actions, not words. And I wear a shirt, and that is by the author James Baldwin. And he's famous for saying, and I may mess up this quote, I'm sorry, I can't believe what you're saying because I'm watching what you're doing. And
Oh,
it's
that is
interesting.
good. That is
Mhm.
very good. Because we've
Yeah.
all had that experience. I mean, you know, the modern English phrase is to walk the talk.
Mhm.
And it's like a mind boggle when you're hearing somebody saying a certain thing, but their behaviors are not at all supporting what they're saying. And as a child, I think ENFPs, probably INFJs too, Joyce, but ENFP children, I don't know about you, Don, but I felt like when I read the story, and the story about the emperor has no clothes, and all the adults are pretending that the emperor has beautiful clothes on when actually he's naked.
Mhm.
And because you're told, you know, if you're really meant to be part of the court, you can see the beautiful clothes. And a
Mhm.
little boy is at the side of the road and he says, but the emperor has no clothes. And I feel like as a little ENFP, I was picking up on all this the stuff underneath, the stuff that
Mhm.
wasn't being said, but that lay underneath what was being said in between. ENFPs tend to pick up on those things. And as a kid,
Mhm.
it's very confusing because if you say something to one of the adults, they deny it because they didn't hear it or see it.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
that I was very so I learned to keep my mouth shut about things I could observe that other people couldn't. But
Mhm.
it's a very lonely feeling, especially as a child,
Mhm.
to be seeing something that nobody else is seeing
Mhm.
because they're not intending to, but their behavior and their words actually deny your reality.
Mhm.
And I think that's what we have some of the wounding we have to recover from and get courage around is, yeah, that there really was anger underneath that, and I darn well know it. And you can all deny it all you want. No, I didn't say it out
Mhm.
loud. But they can deny it all they want to, but because I feel the energy of it.
Mhm.
I mean,
Mhm.
you can feel the energy in the words, and some people are tone deaf to that, and I get it. And I've learned not to judge some of my family and friends when they do something that looks real insensitive because I get it. You know what? They don't have the filter that picks that up. They,
Mm.
honest to goodness, can't see or hear that thing that I don't know how not to see or hear. But they,
Mhm.
honest to goodness, don't. So I'll get upset when a friend does something that just seems really abrupt and a little rude. And then I'll remember later what that person's personality type is. And I'll think, you know what? She really doesn't have the filter. She didn't hear it. She didn't intend to be rude.
Mhm.
And I try to go by people's intentions instead of their stumbling, you know?
Mhm.
So that helps me get out of the judgy place. Say, you know what? She's a friend. She did not mean for that to sound abrupt and rude. She doesn't have a filter for it. And she's still my friend. And I
Mhm.
need to learn not to judge her for something she, honest to God, can't pick up. So it's helped,
Mhm.
knowing type has helped me a lot to get
Mhm.
out of the judgy place.
Yeah.
And be in a place of
Mhm.
acceptance because we all do. We all fumble. We all do things that are inelegant. And God knows, as a young NEFP, I opened my mouth and said things I shouldn't have at times. So, you know, we all need to extend a little grace when people do things that their intentions were good, but their execution just really had a blind spot in it.
Yeah. No, that's beautifully put. Mhm. Another phrase I really like is "a pluribus unum," which is one from many, which is the national motto of the United States. A lot of people, and I was just saying this in class, I love to point this out. A lot of people think it's a melting pot, you know, because they call the United States a melting pot. And I like to remind people that Virgil, who originally wrote it, the Latin poet Virgil, originally meant it as a salad. And that's so beautiful to me because if you think about a salad, each part keeps its autonomy
That's
while
true.
enhancing and nurturing the other parts. And it just, I love how it's a mosaic. I also love mosaics. I don't know if that's an ENFP thing. It probably is. Um, because like it doesn't matter how big or small the piece is in the mosaic. If you remove that piece, your eye immediately knows that piece is
That's
gone.
true. That's true.
And that's how I'd love to see us all on this earth. We're one from many. We have such great diversity on this planet. We're just here together.
Yeah. Everyone's important, and if someone's
Mm-hmm.
missing, there is that felt gap. So,
Mm-hmm.
And that takes me to a silly thing in the Three Musketeers. As a kid, I was so inspired when they put their sword. They said, "One for all, and all for one, and one for all." And that I think that really speaks to the ENFP heart, that we're all in this together. One for all, and all for one, and one for all.
Yeah, because we're so divided right now. And I hate that. I want us to remember we are a pluribus unum on this planet together in this city of Chicago, in this state, in this country, in this world. Mm-hmm.
yeah, it was really great how you mentioned how it's like a salad maintaining its individuality. So that's something
Mm-hmm.
very important to ENFPs too, that people are themselves. You don't have
Mm-hmm.
to become just like everyone else. You don't have to be a cookie cutter, or you don't have to melt in. Yeah, so
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's
every
And
beautiful.
maintains its integrity.
and I don't think I could. I mean, trust me, I do a lot of things, have done a lot of things in life to blend in, okay? And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I was brought up in the deep south, and you there are things you do. They're never spoken by your mother and grandmother, but that's how you do things, and it's a very extroverted feeling culture. And you do things a certain way. So I'm not saying I haven't done that my whole life, because I do know how to do that. But there's some level of being, Joyce, that can't go there. I can keep my mouth shut in arenas where I shouldn't bring it up, or it's too personal to bring up in this arena, or these people don't want to, Don, go there with us to what I call the real conversation. But there are parts of me that see things and feel things deeply. And Joyce, I couldn't give those up if I wanted to. I wouldn't know
Mm-hmm.
how to let go of that way that I'm different in order to
Mm-hmm.
blend in. But I can keep my mouth shut at the appropriate time if people aren't up for it, and learn. I've throughout my adult life found spiritual groups and psychological type groups and learning groups of people that I could be my whole self with. And I got enough sense to know you can't be your whole self everywhere, but if you find groups you can be your whole, individuals in smaller groups of some size you can be your whole self with, that's, I think that feeds our need for authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
And the only thing that makes it up for the times I'm holding stuff back is I also have a need for, I want people to feel oneness and to feel good together, and I don't want to do something that disrupts them and makes them feel uncomfortable. So that's, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
kind of how I excuse sometimes not being my full-blown ENFP self, is I don't ever want it to be something that is disruptive to others. So I try to pick the right arenas to let her out in her full-blown self.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
It's so interesting. Authentic comes from the Greek word auto, which means self. And that's what really authenticity is, being your natural self, your real self.
Yeah, and that's really hard because you have to be vulnerable, able to wound when you let
Mm-hmm.
yourself be that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks
And
a
you
lot, Brene Brown. I was feeling a lot better when I thought that book was going to give me a coat of armor. And all she does is teach you got to take the doggone armor off. And I was so mad at her when I read that book, and yet I knew she was telling the truth. So it was ridiculous to be mad, but gosh, that's not what I wanted to learn from that.
So true, yeah. And speaking of the self, you mentioned there's some way of starting sentences with I or am or being or like something in Spanish or something along the lines of that.
I think I know what you're referring to. And it was Brene Brown who inspired this in me. I almost need a whiteboard here to explain it all. But so I am, let me back up here. Most, in Spanish, there are two verbs of to be, ser and estar. Ser comes from the Latin word sum esse fui futurus. And I love to say, however you use the word to be, remember it represents your sum, your essence, and your future. So whatever we put after that, I am, or you are, or we are, does it become part of our essence? That comes from that word. So when I'm, struggling, I remember this Spanish. So estar comes from the Latin verb sto, stare, steady, staturus, which means to stand. And interesting enough, you use feelings with that verb because you are not your feelings. I love that. In Spanish, it is innately known that you are not your feelings. But I struggle with that because sometimes it just feels like my feelings are my whole essence. And so I will stop and I will remind myself that feelings are just standing here. They're not permanent. They're not part of my essence. And so you can walk away, you can walk towards them, but they're not part of who I am. And I'll tell you the power of the difference of that. So I was talking to a friend who is a native Spanish speaker. And we were talking about something, and I said, well, I wonder if the person thinks in Spanish or English. And she said, well, I think the person thinks in English. And I said, well, I want you to remember that in English, we only have soy mala or soy mal. And we don't have estoy mal. And tears came to her eyes.
Oh, wow.
So the three of us might not understand that fully because we're not native Spanish speakers. But there was something in that instance when I parsed that out that she understood the power of the verb to be and what it must be like when you think soy mal, I'm bad, like it's part of my essence, instead of estoy mal, you know what, I'm just kind of being bad right now. It's I like Brene Brown's work, not I am bad, but I do bad things. We aren't what we do. That isn't part of our essence. So I hope I explained that clearly.
Yeah, you totally did. Language does really impact culture in a lot of ways too. So, yeah, you're right. That really does unfold shame well. There's actually a tense in Japan. It's called passive suffering. And so you actually talk about how things happen to you and affect you. And it's like, yeah, it kind of shows the long sufferingness of Asian people. So, in a sense, our language really does form our habits and behaviors.
Wow.
So,
Dawn, this difference between I am this thing and no, I'm just doing this thing right now. That seems profound. I mean, what a benefit that is to get from your language. Did that come from Latin or did the Spanish come up with that? Because that sounds like a profound thing to have as part of your knowledge.
I have this theory. I hope an Iberian scholar is listening to this recording. I have this theory that it was the indigenous people of Iberia.
Wow.
And it, because with colonization comes assimilation.
Yeah.
But it's assimilation of whatever group you're absorbing or trying to make the status quo. And because Spanish and Portuguese does this, no other Romance language does it.
Wow.
And so that's what I think. And then also a lot of existentialists, classical philosophers, including the big one everybody loves, Marcus Aurelius, has lineage from Iberia. And I don't think that's a coincidence.
Wow.
That because it's already in their head. I would love to see a study of like self-esteem and what language you natively speak. In a lot of, I don't know if it's just Western Africa, but we see the vestiges of it in AAVE. They do not conjugate the verb to be. And to me, when a language, this is just a theory of mine, when a language does not conjugate that verb, to me it says, because you understand you can't, conjugating is really the noun controlling the verb. You can't control existence. So either you omit it or you don't conjugate it. So I find all that really fascinating. And when you were mentioning about Japan, it triggered something to me. I was watching this documentary once about how different cultures show love, coming back to love. And I guess in Japan, they say thank you more to their loved ones than I love you. And that just spoke to my heart, because I also know in Latin, to say I thank you, we say gratias tibi ago, which literally means I make or I do thanks for you. Oh. And I can't fully explain it, but it grabs my heart when I think of that. Instead of just I am thankful, I make this. I try to say thank you a lot more to people ever since I saw that documentary, because it is an act of love, gratitude.
And
Mm.
doing the making of something, oh my gosh, that's an act of love. And there are people
Mhm.
who that's their primary way of showing love. Can I've never talked with anyone else about Marcus Aurelius, but I feel like I have permission in this company to say
Yes.
something this nerdy.
Mhm.
Don't ask me where at age 12 I got a hold of a copy of the is it the Meditations of Marcus
The
Aurelius?
meditations.
The
Uh-huh.
Meditations. I read that the summer I was 12 and just devoured it. So let me ask you, what the heck is there about an ENFP that makes Marcus Aurelius and the Meditations seem like a wonderful thing to read? Because I'm back to odd duck now, realizing that I loved Marcus Aurelius when I was 12. What is it about? Well, it's just so admirable. I mean, he was not doing anything for a reward in the hereafter or anything. It was doing
Mhm.
the right thing because it's the right thing right now.
Mhm.
Doing the
That
honorable thing and the appropriate thing. Is that the essence of what you think reached out and grabbed my ENFP heart?
Yeah, perhaps. That's so interesting. I know that a lot of INTJs really like him. And you know how close we are to INTJs. Brene Brown loves him. She quotes him a lot. I mean,
Yeah.
he's kind of controversial now because a lot of people think that his stoicism enables, or I don't know what verb I want to put in here, but they yoke it to toxic masculinity. So I don't know a
Hmm.
huge amount about Marcus Aurelius, but I also don't believe in I hate binary thinking. I just oppose it. But let me ask you, I'm sorry to ask you a personal question, but are you Episcopalian?
My God, how would you figure that out?
Episcopalians love Marcus Aurelius. She is Episcopalian, Brene Brown, and other Episcopalians I know love. In fact, I know an INTJ who was raised Episcopalian who would tell you that the meditations was his Bible.
That is so funny. And I wasn't raised that way, but I went to Swanee and I
Hmm.
sang in the choir. And I think you can't sing in the choir and hear those intelligent sermons and that beautiful, you know, the French motets and the why I'm blanking on a word here, but the chants and the chants in harmony. I don't think you can listen to that and not think this Episcopal. I'm not saying anybody else should, but that that touched my ENFP heart. The beauty of
Hmm.
the music and what was being said. And I became an Episcopalian because I went to an Episcopal college. They didn't have a marching band. I had been in the marching band in high school, and all of a sudden I got to Swanee and realized, oh my God, there's no marching band to be my family. What am I going to do? And my roommate and her boyfriend said, hey, we're going to the choir trials. You want to go to choir with us? So, no, I had no intention to sing in the choir, but I needed a family, and I knew that. I knew I needed a place to belong. And I
Hmm.
didn't realize till I got to college that I had left the band behind. So I got in the choir, and then I end up an Episcopalian, and I already love Marcus Aurelius. So maybe the seeds were in me. That is hysterical, Don. That just seemed to come out of nowhere. Good for you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so on that note, thank you both for coming out tonight.
Yeah, always end, Marcus Aurelius is usually the drop mic moment for
That is amazing. What
Mhm.
a that was just so astonishing. I do love the triggering, not triggers a bad word, but the bringing forth
Connecting.
the thing, the
Mhm.
connecting things with
Mhm.
others. I thoroughly enjoyed this. I really
Oh,
did.
so did I, and I just wanna plug, I think I know a lot of ENFPs change careers really free. I have not in 20 years, and I think part of that is because Latin offers so much to connect.
Yeah.
And I could always be learning something. So I love to
Yeah.
learn because I'm an ENFP, and I love to learn because I'm neurodivergent. So, I think if people are looking for something new, look at Latin
And
You
Marcus
sold me.
Aurelius.
and Marcus Aurelius.
Yeah, and I find ENFPs, they teach Latin in such a people-friendly way. You take things that are usually very dry for people and you can make it fun. And they're like, "Wow, you're so good at making it engaging." And it's inspiring the how you deal with the things that you're a part of. So, you breathe
Yeah.
life into it. So,
Oh, well, thank you. It really frustrates me when people say Latin is a dead language. Like, look at how alive we've shown it is. Like, it hurts me when people say that,
Of
because
course
it's
it does,
not.
because you're vulnerable.
Because yes, I'm vulnerably telling you of how much it hurts me when people say Latin is dead. And I mean, this is probably a separate podcast too, but being neurodivergent and knowing these root words, something I would do to focus, because listening to a lecture is like was torturous to me in undergrad, is I would listen to the person and I would break down all the root words I could in
Wow.
the and that's how I would stay focused
So
and engaged.
you were keeping the
Mhm,
part that needed to be busy so that you could focus. That's
mhm,
great. You know what I do to keep that part busy? I take notes.
mhm,
I am an incurable note taker. Ask me if I go back and read the notes ever. The answer is no. The point was never to create a record to read later. The point
mhm,
an NLP instructor taught me was I was keeping, I was making the learning go in, and my hand was working. It kept my brain from racing, because speech is so much slower than the brain moves in.
mhm.
I was taking notes, and she said I was helping myself stay in the moment. So,
Mhm.
Mm.
yeah.
Those are brilliant methods to stay in the moment for all you ENFPs who might need it. And so, thank you, Carol, for coming out. Feel free to check out the Association of Psychological Type. It'll be
Please
linked
do.
below. Yes. And when Dawn comes out with her Root Word Nerd podcast, I'll also link it below too. So, thanks
Great.
everyone for watching today. I hope you guys had an ENFP party with all of us. And we'll see you in the next one.